My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I've spent the last 15 years hunting down financial criminals for the federal government. I've exposed embezzlement schemes worth millions, traced money through offshore accounts, and sent white-collar criminals to prison with nothing but spreadsheets and determination. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the call I received on Tuesday, October 15th at 2:47 p.m. I was reviewing audit reports in my Hartford office when my phone buzzed with Marcus's number. My 16-year-old son never called during school hours, and the panic in his voice when I answered still haunts me today. "Aunt Mom, please come get me," he whispered, his voice cracking in a way that sent ice through my veins. I could hear him trying not to cry, that particular sound a mother never forgets, the sound of a child trying to be brave when their world is falling apart. In the background, I heard the echo of bathroom tiles and the distant hum of hallway conversations. He was hiding again, just like he'd been hiding for months. "They hurt me again, Mom. I'm bleeding." Those 4 words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and making my hands shake as I gripped the phone. Marcus had been attending Westfield Prep Academy for 2 years, ever since I'd worked overtime and taken on extra audits to afford the tuition. This was supposed to be his fresh start, his chance at the kind of education I never had growing up in East Hartford. The brochures promised character development and anti-bullying excellence. I'd believed their glossy marketing because I wanted to believe it, because every parent wants to believe they're giving their child the best possible future. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days catching financial liars while paying tuition to institutional ones. The drive to Westfield Prep took 38 minutes through Connecticut's winding back roads, lined with autumn maples that should have been beautiful but looked like blood spatters against the gray October sky. I'd made this drive dozens of times for parent-teacher conferences, school plays, and soccer games, but never like this. Never with my heart hammering against my ribs and my mind racing through every conversation I'd had with Marcus over the past few months. The subtle changes I'd noticed but dismissed, the quiet dinners, the reluctance to talk about school, the way he'd started asking if he could be homeschooled. I'd attributed it to teenage phases, to the natural challenges of adapting to a competitive academic environment. A cold dread settled in, the bitter taste of maternal guilt. When I pulled into the circular driveway of Westfield Prep, with its pristine brick buildings and manicured lawns, I felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried me through 15 years of federal investigations. This was my son, my only child, and someone was going to answer for what happened to him. The school looked exactly as it always did. Impressive, authoritative, expensive. But now I saw it differently, through the lens of a mother whose child was bleeding in a bathroom stall. Every perfectly placed shrub and polished window felt like a facade hiding something rotten underneath, a festering secret beneath layers of privilege. I found Marcus exactly where I expected, 3rd stall from the left in the main building's 1st floor bathroom, the same one he'd called from 3 times before. His lip was split, his nose was bleeding, and there were bruises forming along his jawline that made my vision blur with rage. But it was the look in his eyes that broke me, that hollow, defeated expression that no 16-year-old should ever wear. He looked up at me with a mixture of relief and shame, as if he believed somehow that this was his fault, that he'd failed me by being vulnerable. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being patient, done being diplomatic, done trusting a system that had failed my son. "Who did this to you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Marcus shook his head, the same way he'd done every time before, protecting his attackers out of fear or some misguided sense of loyalty to a school that didn't protect him. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't going to accept his silence or the school's excuses. As I cleaned the blood from his face with shaking hands, I felt something shift inside me, a cold clarity that I recognized from my most complex fraud investigations. Someone was going to pay for this, and I was going to be the one to collect. The fight had just begun. After cleaning Marcus up and taking photos of his injuries, old habits from documenting evidence, I marched straight to the administrative office with my son beside me. The secretary, Mrs. Pemberton, looked up from her computer with that practiced smile that falters when confronted with actual problems rather than tuition payments or scheduling conflicts. When I explained that I needed to see Dr. Thornfield immediately regarding an assault on my son, her expression shifted to something between annoyance and practiced concern. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Martinez, but Dr. Thornfield is in meetings all afternoon preparing for tonight's gala," she said, as if fundraising took precedence over student safety. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dropping to the tone I used when questioning suspects who thought they were smarter than federal auditors. Mrs. Pemberton's smile became even more strained as she explained that tonight was the annual Westfield Excellence Gala, a $500 per plate fundraiser for the new STEM wing. Apparently, several major donors were attending, including the congressman from our district and the CEO of Hartford Financial Group. Dr. Thornfield couldn't possibly be disturbed because he was coordinating with the catering team and reviewing his presentation materials. I stared at her in disbelief, feeling the same sick recognition I'd experienced when catching executives prioritizing stock prices over worker safety. Let me understand this correctly," I said, gesturing to Marcus, whose split lip was still seeping blood onto his school uniform. "My son was assaulted on school grounds, during school hours, and you're telling me that place settings are more important than his safety?" Mrs. Pemberton shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Dr. Thornfield's closed office door. I could hear muffled voices inside, animated discussions about wine pairings and auction items, the kind of conversations that revealed where this institution's true priorities lay. The contrast between Marcus's pain and their party planning felt obscene, like watching someone redecorate while their house burned down. Marcus tugged at my sleeve, whispering that we should just go home, that it wasn't worth it. But looking at his defeated posture, I realized this was exactly the response they counted on. Parents who would accept the runaround, who would schedule convenient appointments to discuss inconvenient truths. Mrs. Pemberton offered to schedule a meeting for next week, after the gala excitement died down, as if my son's assault was some minor administrative detail to be handled during regular business hours. The patronizing tone in her voice, the veiled condescension, triggered every instinct I'd developed for spotting institutional cover-ups and bureaucratic deflection. I thought about all the times I'd sat across from executives who claimed they were too busy to discuss missing funds or safety violations, who hid behind meetings and scheduling conflicts while their victims waited for justice. The pattern was always the same: delay, deflect, and hope the problem would disappear or the complainant would give up. But they'd never encountered a federal auditor before, someone trained to persist until the truth emerged. As Mrs. Pemberton continued explaining Dr. Thornfield's impossible schedule, I felt that familiar itch that told me I was looking at something bigger than what appeared on the surface. A cold and forensic curiosity began to stir. "You're fine," I said, forcing myself to sound defeated while my mind started working through possibilities. "I understand that fundraising is important. Can you at least tell me when Dr. Thornfield might be available?" Mrs. Pemberton's relief was palpable as she flipped through her appointment book, suggesting Thursday morning for a 15-minute meeting. 15 minutes to discuss my son's safety, the same amount of time they probably spent choosing centerpieces. As we left the office, I was already formulating questions that had nothing to do with Marcus's immediate injuries and everything to do with the school's systematic failures. That evening, as I helped Marcus with his homework at our kitchen table in our modest East Hartford home, I couldn't stop thinking about the disconnect between Westfield Prep's promises and their actions. I'd reviewed their anti-bullying policy when enrolling Marcus, 12 pages of impressive-sounding procedures and zero-tolerance statements that clearly meant nothing when actually tested. The school collected nearly $30,000 per year from families like mine, parents who worked overtime and took second mortgages to give their children opportunities we never had. But what were we actually paying for? As I watched my son struggle to concentrate on calculus with a swollen jaw, I realized I was about to find out exactly where that tuition money was going. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of federal service. I called in sick, but it wasn't just a day off. It was a desperate, unprecedented act, fueled by a mother's rage and the hollow look in my son's eyes. I drove straight to the Connecticut State Library, every nerve on fire, to begin researching Westfield Prep Academy. Years of auditing had taught me that financial records tell stories that people try to hide, and institutions that failed their basic obligations usually had financial secrets worth protecting. I started with their annual reports, publicly filed tax documents, and state education funding records. What I found in those first 3 hours of research made my blood run cold, and my auditor instincts screamed that something was very, very wrong. Westfield Prep had received $1.2 million in federal grants over the past 5 years, specifically earmarked for anti-bullying programs, mental health initiatives, and student safety improvements. The grant applications, which I meticulously accessed through federal databases I still had clearance for, working with a focused intensity that blurred the line between professional duty and personal vendetta, painted a picture of a school committed to creating a harassment-free environment and implementing cutting-edge intervention strategies. Dr. Thornfield's signature appeared on dozens of documents promising comprehensive training programs, peer mediation systems, and anonymous reporting mechanisms. Yet my son had been systematically bullied for months with no intervention whatsoever. The deeper I dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Federal funds designated for counselor salaries had been redirected to administrative costs, buried deep within line items that screamed red flag to my trained eye. Money meant for anti-bullying technology, cameras and monitoring systems, had been reclassified as facility improvements. Most shocking of all, $300,000 allocated for a specialized anti-bullying coordinator position had been absorbed into Dr. Thornfield's expanded salary and benefits package. The man who claimed to be too busy with gala preparations to address student safety was literally being paid with federal anti-bullying money to ignore problems like Marcus's situation. The audacity was sickening. I cross-referenced incident reports with the school's annual safety statistics submitted to the state SAR, and found discrepancies that would have triggered immediate federal investigations in any other context. Westfield Prep reported 0 bullying incidents for the past 2 academic years, despite internal memos I managed to unravel through meticulous analysis of their public and semi-public data. Finding patterns and inconsistencies in the seemingly innocuous data within their parent portal and publicly available board minutes that referenced ongoing behavioral situations and student conflict management. They were systematically underreporting incidents to maintain their elite reputation and continue receiving awards for exceptional school climate. The fraud was breathtaking in its scope and cynicism. By Thursday morning, I had assembled a case file that would have impressed my federal colleagues: financial records, grant documentation, falsified reports, and a clear pattern of deliberately misusing taxpayer funds while failing to protect students. I had pushed boundaries, worked without sleep, and my career might be at risk, but it didn't matter. This wasn't just about money. This was about my son's safety and the safety of countless other children whose parents trusted this institution. I realized that Dr. Thornfield's refusal to see me wasn't about being busy. It was about avoiding accountability for a systematic failure that could destroy his career and potentially result in federal charges. When I arrived for my scheduled 15-minute meeting, armed with a folder of documents and wearing my best federal auditor expression, I could see Mrs. Pemberton's nervousness immediately. Something about my demeanor had changed from the distraught mother she'd dismissed earlier to something more threatening, the calm confidence of someone who held cards they hadn't revealed yet. Dr. Thornfield emerged from his office with his practiced administrator smile, but I caught the flicker of concern when he saw the thickness of my folder and the way I was dressed like I was conducting an official investigation. His smooth facade showed its first crack. Mrs. Martinez, I'm so sorry for the delay, he began, his voice carrying that smooth authority that had probably charmed hundreds of parents into compliance over the years. I understand Marcus had an unfortunate incident, and I want to assure you that we take all student safety concerns very seriously. As he spoke, I noticed how he avoided saying bullying or assault, using corporate euphemisms to minimize what had happened to my son. But I'd heard these same verbal tactics from executives trying to downplay embezzlement schemes, and I knew exactly how to respond to institutional gaslighting. This wasn't going to be a polite meeting. Dr. Thornfield, I said, settling into the chair across from his mahogany desk and placing my folder deliberately between us. I think we need to have a very different conversation than the one you're prepared for. His smile faltered slightly as I opened the folder and began placing documents on his desk with the methodical precision I'd learned from years of federal audits. The first page was the most recent federal grant application, with his signature promising comprehensive anti-bullying programs. The second was Marcus's medical report from yesterday's emergency room visit, documenting injuries consistent with assault. The third was a financial summary I'd compiled showing the discrepancies between promised programs and actual expenditures. Dr. Thornfield's face went through a fascinating transformation as he realized what he was looking at. Confusion, recognition, fear, and finally a calculated attempt to regain control. Mrs. Martinez, I'm not sure what you think you found here, but I can assure you that all of our federal grants are handled by qualified professionals and subject to regular audits. His voice carried that patronizing tone I'd encountered countless times from people who assumed they were dealing with an amateur. But when I slid my federal auditor credentials across the desk, his entire demeanor shifted to something approaching full-blown panic. His eyes darted, searching for an escape. Mr. Thornfield, I said, deliberately dropping the doctor title that he wore like armor. I am one of those qualified professionals, and I've been conducting my own audit of your practices. Would you like to explain how $300,000 in federal anti-bullying funds ended up as salary enhancements while children like my son are being systematically attacked on your campus? The silence that followed was the same kind I'd experienced when confronting executives with irrefutable evidence of fraud. He reached for his phone, his hand trembling slightly, probably to call his lawyer or the school board, but I continued before he could dial. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice carrying 15 years of authority in dealing with financial criminals. You're going to explain to me exactly how this school operates, why incidents are being suppressed rather than addressed, and what you plan to do about the federal fraud I've documented. Or I can walk out of here and make some phone calls to my colleagues at the Department of Education who handle grant compliance investigations. Dr. Thornfield set down his phone, sweat beginning to form along his hairline despite the October chill outside his office windows. His carefully constructed world was crumbling. What followed was the most honest conversation Dr. Thornfield had probably had in years. The truth spilled out in desperate fragments, a torrent of self-serving excuses, the relentless pressure from the board to maintain Westfield's elite reputation, the unspoken policy of discouraging incident reports that might affect rankings, the systematic redirection of federal funds to maintain the school's physical appearance while ignoring its moral obligations. He admitted that Marcus wasn't the first victim, that they'd been quietly transferring problem students rather than addressing behavioral issues, creating an environment where bullies operated with impunity. It was a confession of calculated cruelty. But as Dr. Thornfield finished his confession, my phone buzzed with a text that changed everything. It was from Marcus. Mom, I overheard them talking about the gala. It sounded bad. They mentioned you. I'm scared. The message hit me like ice water as I realized that my investigation hadn't gone unnoticed, and that the very event Dr. Thornfield had prioritized over my son's safety was now being weaponized against us. The gala wasn't just a fundraiser. It was going to be their platform for controlling the narrative and discrediting any accusations I might make. The stakes had just escalated. Dr. Thornfield, I said, standing and gathering my documents while he watched with growing alarm. "I want you to know that I'll be attending your gala tonight. And unlike our conversation here, that one won't be private." His face went completely white as he realized what I was threatening. Public exposure in front of donors, parents, and community leaders who believed in Westfield Prep's carefully constructed image. As I reached the door, I turned back with the same chilling smile I'd used when informing executives that their financial crimes were about to become front-page news. That evening, I spent 2 hours getting ready for the Westfield Excellence Gala, choosing my outfit with the same strategic precision I'd use for a federal court appearance. I wore my navy blue suit, the one that commanded respect in congressional hearings, paired with Marcus's school pin on my lapel, a detail I knew would resonate with every parent in attendance. The $500 ticket price had maxed out my credit card, but as I drove through Westfield's wrought iron gates toward the gala venue, I knew it would be the best investment I'd ever made in my son's future. The Hartford Country Club sparkled with Connecticut's elite society, exactly the kind of old money gathering where uncomfortable truths were typically buried beneath polite conversation and charitable tax write-offs. I recognized faces from the society pages, pharmaceutical executives, hedge fund managers, state politicians, all the people whose donations kept Westfield Prep's reputation pristine while children like Marcus suffered in silence. Dr. Thornfield moved through the crowd like a practiced politician, accepting congratulations on another successful fundraising year, while my son sat at home with bruises that would take weeks to heal. My anger, cold and sharp, sharpened my focus. I positioned myself strategically near the microphone as Dr. Thornfield began his presentation about Westfield's unprecedented commitment to student excellence and safety. Every word felt like a personal insult as he highlighted their zero-tolerance bullying policy and industry-leading intervention programs. The same programs that existed only on paper while federal money disappeared into administrative salaries. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Parents and donors who genuinely believed they were supporting an institution that protected children rather than one that systematically failed them. A knot of dread twisted in my stomach. What if they don't believe me? When Dr. Thornfield opened the floor for questions and comments from our wonderful Westfield community, I stood up, my heart hammering but my voice steady with 15 years of federal authority. "Dr. Thornfield, I'm Rebecca Martinez, Marcus Martinez's mother, and I have a question about your anti-bullying programs." The room's energy shifted immediately as conversations stopped and heads turned toward me. I could see Dr. Thornfield's face pale, his practiced smile vanishing, as he realized his nightmare was beginning, that the private conversation from his office was about to become very public. "Yesterday, my 16-year-old son called me from your school bathroom, bleeding from injuries sustained in what you would probably call an interpersonal conflict," I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom. "When I tried to meet with you to discuss this assault, I was told you were too busy preparing for tonight's event to address student safety concerns. I'm curious how that prioritization aligns with the $1.2 million in federal anti-bullying grants your school has received over the past 5 years." The silence was deafening as the full implications of my question registered with an audience that included several state legislators and Department of Education officials. Dr. Thornfield's attempt at damage control was pathetic to watch, stammering excuses about isolated incidents and comprehensive review procedures, but I wasn't finished. "I'm a federal auditor, Dr. Thornfield, and I've spent the past week reviewing your grant compliance and financial records. Would you like to explain to these generous donors how federal funds designated for student protection programs were redirected to administrative salaries, while children like my son were systematically brutalized?" The room erupted in shocked murmurs as parents began connecting dots they'd never wanted to see, realizing their tuition money and donations had been funding institutional negligence. When Dr. Thornfield finally stopped sputtering excuses and tried to regain control by calling for security, I delivered the 5 words that ended his career. "I audited your federal grants." Those 5 words, spoken with the calm authority of someone who held irrefutable evidence, created a silence so complete that the only sound was the crystal chandelier tinkling above us. In that moment, everyone in the room understood that this wasn't an emotional outburst from a distraught parent. This was a federal auditor announcing the discovery of systematic fraud involving taxpayer money and child safety. His world, and the school's, just collapsed. The aftermath moved with the swift brutality that only comes when institutional facades collapse under the weight of documented truth. By Monday morning, Dr. Thornfield had resigned pending federal investigation. By Thursday, the Department of Education had frozen all grant payments to Westfield Prep pending compliance review. Within 2 weeks, 3 other district schools were under investigation for similar violations, as my evidence revealed a systematic pattern of misusing federal safety funds while children suffered. Marcus returned to school the following Monday to find a completely different environment, one where his safety was finally prioritized over statistics and reputation, where accountability had replaced the culture of institutional protection that had nearly destroyed his faith in justice itself.